Karen wasn't just your average HOA president. She was a tyrant in khakis. First, she fined me for my driveway, then for my curtains, and when I planted legal native flowers, she billed me for her personal electric bill. And when I refused to pay it, she called 911 on me. Twice. I thought I'd seen everything when it came to HOA drama, but Karen Whitmore proved me wrong. As the self-appointed president of our Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association, she had turned neighborhood management into her personal kingdom. What started as a simple landscaping dispute ended with her demanding I pay her personal electric bill and calling 911 when I refused. It all began 3 months ago when I moved into this supposedly peaceful suburban neighborhood. The houses were nice, the streets were clean, and the HOA fees seemed reasonable. What I didn't know was that Karen had been running the association like her own personal empire for the past 5 years, with virtually no oversight from other board members who had long since given up trying to reason with her. The first red flag came during my initial walkthrough of the neighborhood rules. Karen appeared at my front door with a 3-inch binder of regulations that weren't in the original HOA documents. She stood there in her perfectly pressed khakis and polo shirt, clipboard in hand, explaining how she had enhanced the community standards during her tenure as president. Now, as you can see in section 12.4, she said, flipping through pages with the precision of a drill sergeant, lawn maintenance must be performed every Saturday between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m., no exceptions. I personally inspect every yard on Sunday mornings to ensure compliance. I raised an eyebrow at this. The original HOA documents say lawn care should be maintained regularly, but they don't specify exact days or times. Karen's smile tightened. Well, I've improved upon those outdated guidelines. These new rules have been implemented for the betterment of our community property values. That should have been my warning to document everything. But I naively thought I could handle one overzealous HOA president. I was wrong. The real trouble started when I hired a landscaping company to install native plants in my front yard. I had done my research, obtained the proper permits from the city, and even checked the original HOA covenants to make sure everything was compliant. The native plants were drought-resistant, beautiful, and perfectly legal according to every official document I could find. Karen showed up the morning after the installation, her face flushed with righteous indignation. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, pointing at my newly planted garden. "Those plants are not on the approved landscaping list." I stepped outside with my copy of the HOA documents. According to the covenants, homeowners can plant any drought-resistant native species. These California poppies and lavender bushes meet all the requirements. "Those covenants are old," she snapped, pulling out her ever-present clipboard. "I've created updated landscaping guidelines that require pre-approval for any changes. You need to remove these immediately and replant with approved grass varieties." "Show me where these updated guidelines were legally adopted by the HOA board," I said calmly. Karen's eyes narrowed. "I am the HOA board. I make the decisions around here, and I'm telling you, those plants need to go." That's when I realized I was dealing with someone who had completely lost sight of her actual authority. Karen had convinced herself that being HOA president meant she could create and enforce whatever rules she wanted, regardless of legal procedures or homeowners' rights. Over the next few weeks, the situation escalated rapidly. Karen began leaving violation notices on my door almost daily, each one more creative than the last. She cited me for having my trash cans visible from the street for more than 30 minutes, for parking my car in my own driveway during inappropriate hours, and for having curtains that were allegedly the wrong shade of white. Each violation came with increasingly steep fines that had no basis in the actual HOA documents. When I ignored these made-up penalties, Karen's anger reached new heights. She started showing up at my house multiple times a day, taking photos of my property from different angles and leaving lengthy notes about my continued defiance of community standards. The breaking point came when I received a bill in my mailbox for $4,376.72. It wasn't an HOA fee or a fine for some imaginary violation. It was Karen's personal electric bill from Pacific Gas and Electric, with a sticky note attached that read, "Your non-compliance has forced me to work extra hours managing your violations. You owe me for the additional electricity used in my home office." I actually laughed out loud when I saw it. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. Karen had somehow convinced herself that her obsessive behavior was my fault and that I should compensate her for the energy she wasted harassing me. I knocked on her door that afternoon, bill in hand. Karen answered wearing rubber gloves and holding a spray bottle, clearly in the middle of one of her obsessive cleaning sessions. "I believe you accidentally put this in my mailbox," I said, holding up her electric bill. Karen's face lit up with satisfaction. "Oh no, that's correct. As I explained in my note, your deliberate violations have created additional work for me. I've had to spend countless hours documenting your infractions, researching penalty structures, and corresponding with various city departments about your non-compliance. My home office electricity usage has increased significantly." I stared at her for a moment, trying to process the mental gymnastics required to reach this conclusion. "Karen, you cannot bill homeowners for your personal utility costs. That's not how HOA management works. According to my calculations," she continued, completely ignoring my response, "you owe me for 3 months of increased electricity usage plus a processing fee for the additional administrative burden. Payment is due within 10 business days or I'll be forced to take legal action." "I'm not paying your electric bill," I said firmly. "This is harassment, and you need to stop." Karen's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to cold fury. "We'll see about that," she said before slamming the door in my face. I should have known she wouldn't let it go, but I underestimated just how far she was willing to take her delusions of authority. 2 days later, I was working from home when I heard sirens approaching the neighborhood. I looked out my window and watched a police car pull up directly in front of my house. 2 officers got out and walked to my front door. Behind them, Karen emerged from her house across the street, practically bouncing with excitement as she hurried over to join them on my front porch. I opened the door before they could knock. "Good afternoon, officers. Is there a problem?" The older officer, a patient-looking man in his 50s, consulted his notepad. "We received a call about theft of services and refusal to pay legally mandated fees. The caller claims you owe money to the homeowners association and are refusing to pay." I glanced at Karen, who was standing behind the officers with her arms crossed and a satisfied smirk on her face. "I'm current on all my HOA fees," I said. "My automatic payment went through just last week." "That's not what this is about," Karen interjected, stepping forward. "He owes me $437.62 for additional administrative costs related to his ongoing violations. When someone refuses to pay legally mandated fees, that's theft of services." The younger officer looked confused. "Ma'am, are you saying he owes the homeowners association this money?" "He owes it to me personally," Karen clarified, "for the extra work his violations have caused. I had to use additional electricity in my home office to manage his case." Both officers exchanged glances, and I could see the exact moment they realized what they were dealing with. The older officer cleared his throat diplomatically. "Ma'am, we can't arrest someone for refusing to pay your personal electric bill. That's a civil matter between private parties, not a criminal issue." Karen's face turned red. "But he's stealing services. I provided administrative work and he's refusing to pay for it."
Did he request this administrative work? The younger officer asked. Well, no, but did he sign any agreement to pay for your services? Not exactly, but then this is not a criminal matter, the older officer said firmly. If you believe someone owes you money for services, you need to take it up in small claims court. We cannot make arrests based on personal billing disputes. I can see Karen's carefully constructed fantasy crumbling in real time. She had been so convinced of her own authority that she genuinely believed the police would arrest me for refusing to pay her utility bill. But I'm the HOA president, she protested. I have the authority to assess fees and penalties. Ma'am, being HOA president doesn't give you the right to bill residents for your personal expenses. If you continue to make false reports, you could be charged with misuse of emergency services. After the officers left, Karen stood in my driveway for several minutes, staring at my house with a mixture of rage and disbelief. I watched from my window as she finally stalked back to her own property, muttering angrily to herself. I thought that would be the end of it. But Karen's humiliation only made her more determined to prove her authority. Over the next week, she ramped up her harassment campaign to absurd levels. She started leaving multiple violation notices per day, each one more ridiculous than the last. She cited me for aggressive landscaping choices that intimidate neighbors, displaying non-approved outdoor furniture, and maintaining a driveway that reflects sunlight in a disruptive manner. The fines she invented grew increasingly outrageous: $500 for environmental non-compliance, $750 for architectural insubordination, and $1,000 for willful disregard of community harmony standards. When I continued to ignore her made-up penalties, Karen escalated to what she probably thought was her nuclear option. She called 911 again, this time claiming I was destroying community property values through malicious non-compliance and demanding my immediate arrest for grand theft of neighborhood equity. The same two officers responded to the call, and this time they were noticeably less patient with Karen's antics. Ma'am, this is the third time this month you've called us about civil disputes with your neighbor, the older officer said sternly. We've explained that these are not criminal matters. But he's causing thousands of dollars in damage to our property values, Karen insisted. That has to be some kind of vandalism or destruction of property. Having plants you don't like is not vandalism, the younger officer replied, and property values are not community property that someone can steal. That's when I decided it was time to take action. Karen had clearly lost all sense of reality, and her harassment was interfering with my ability to enjoy my own home. I had documented every violation notice, every made-up fine, and every interaction we'd had. It was time to show her what real legal consequences looked like. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the state's Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOA operations. I also filed a harassment complaint with the local police department and sent a certified letter to every homeowner in the association detailing Karen's unauthorized rule changes and her attempts to collect personal payments from residents. The response was swift and devastating. It turned out that several other homeowners had been dealing with Karen's made-up rules and arbitrary fines, but they had been too intimidated to speak up. Once they learned they weren't alone, a revolt began. Within 2 weeks, enough homeowners had signed a petition to call for an emergency board meeting and a vote of no confidence in Karen's leadership. The Department of Real Estate launched an investigation into her unauthorized rule changes and her attempts to collect personal payments from homeowners. The emergency board meeting was held on a Tuesday evening in the community center, and nearly every homeowner in the association showed up. Karen arrived looking confident, apparently believing she could talk her way out of the situation. I don't understand why everyone is so upset, she began, standing at the front of the room with her usual clipboard and binder. Everything I've done has been for the betterment of our community. These enhanced guidelines have maintained our property values and our neighborhood standards. One by one, homeowners stood up to share their experiences with Karen's unauthorized rules and outrageous fines. Mrs. Peterson from Oak Street had been fined $800 for insufficiently cheerful garden decorations. Mr. Rodriguez had received violation notices for parking his work truck in his own driveway overnight. The Johnsons had been cited for having children's toys visible in their backyard for more than 2 hours per day. As the stories piled up, Karen's face grew paler and paler. She kept interrupting to explain how each rule was necessary for community standards, but her explanations only made her look more delusional. The final blow came when I stood up and read aloud from her electric bill demand, explaining how she had called 911 twice, trying to have me arrested for refusing to pay her personal utility costs. This is what happens when someone loses sight of their actual authority, I concluded. Karen has turned HOA management into a personal power trip, and it's time for it to end. The vote wasn't even close. Karen was removed from the HOA board by a margin of 43-2, with only herself and her next-door neighbor, Mrs. Hartwell, voting in her favor. But the real consequences were just beginning. The Department of Real Estate's investigation found that Karen had violated multiple state regulations governing HOA operations. She had created unauthorized rules without proper board approval, attempted to collect unauthorized fees, and misrepresented her authority to homeowners. The penalties were severe: a $15,000 fine for regulatory violations, plus an additional $5,000 for each homeowner who had paid her unauthorized fees. Since 7 families had actually paid some of her made-up fines over the years, that brought her total penalty to $50,000. Karen was also banned from serving on any HOA board in the state for 10 years and required to pay restitution to every homeowner who had been affected by her unauthorized rules. When the Department of Real Estate agent read aloud the penalties at the follow-up meeting, Karen's face went completely white. $50,000? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't have that kind of money. I was just trying to help the community. Karen built her little kingdom on fear, fake rules, and imaginary power. But real authority isn't about control. It's about accountability. And when the community stood up together, we reminded her what consequences look like. She lost her position, her money, and her reputation. But more importantly, we got our neighborhood back. Have you ever faced a power-hungry HOA president like Karen, or dealt with made-up rules that pushed you too far? Drop your wildest HOA story in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. We're exposing every HOA tyrant one meltdown at a time. See you in the next video.